Hey, and welcome to the Tru Fire webinar. I was wondering, just to begin, see who is online. If you would do me a favor, and if you would type in the chat feature where you are located and what you do in your church, what your role is for your church. Just wait a minute while everyone joins us. Awesome. It seems like we got people from all over, from Ohio, Florida, people from Georgia. It's awesome. Wisconsin. Great. Well, it's good to have you all join us. My name is John Hales. I'm in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois. I serve at an Assemblies of God church here. I've been doing Tru Fire for 3 years now since it began. It's a curriculum that I love to use, and I'm excited to share some pieces with you today. Most of you just wrote in the questions part. So if you have any questions throughout today, feel free to write them in there. We would love to answer questions as we go. If you don't get a response in this webinar, we will try and send you an email to make sure you get a response there. So just a couple of things we're going to go through. Today we're kind of talking about a little bit about simplifying your curriculum search. And so kind of helping you really understand Tru Fire in a simple way, helping you to kind of get a brief overview of the curriculum. We're going to focus on the elementary curriculum today. So if you've got questions about other curriculum, we can answer that. But our focus will be on Tru Fire Story. But before we do that, I just want to share briefly with you this. You know, curriculum searching can be very difficult. I know in my own ministries over the past number of years, I've searched for curriculum a lot, and I've looked at many different kinds of curriculum, and it seems like a lot of us value different things when it comes to curriculum. But I really want to suggest that there are maybe 4 elements that really we should be paying closer attention to. These can help you simplify your curriculum search. And the first thing is this idea of philosophy. You know, philosophy is like the framework behind a curriculum. What I mean by that is it's like the structure, it's the foundation. Imagine if you were buying a house and you saw the house looked really beautiful, right? But then you get a surveyor come in and they say, hey, don't buy this house. This is a terrible house. It's got a terrible foundation and structure. And in many ways, the philosophy behind a curriculum can seem so boring to us, but it's basically the framework. This is the structure that's going to basically help us accomplish what we want to accomplish in children's ministry. So I always encourage people, start with the philosophy. Might seem boring, but start there, and I think you will appreciate it. The second thing to check out with the curriculum is the scope and sequence. What I mean by this is, does the curriculum have a plan? Do they have a long-term plan for discipleship? Are they covering the whole Bible? A lot of children's ministries, we move from one curriculum that's 6 weeks to another that's 4 weeks, and then we do a one-off week and a 5 week. But are we covering the Bible? Are we just jumping around, or are we building and working towards something? If a curriculum's got a scope and sequence, then it really says that they've got a plan in place. Another third thing, I really feel like adaptability. Every ministry is different. I'm in Champaign-Urbana. I'm in quite a liberal college town. I know plenty of children's pastors in small town America. I know some in massive cities. And let me tell you something, it's different everywhere. And so curriculum needs to be adaptable. And this last thing is, sometimes I think engaging, you know, we got to look at this. Sometimes I think we think engaging is a media, but I want to challenge you to say that engaging is it varied activities? Is it good teaching techniques? There's so much more that's involved than just media. Often we turn this upside down, and the most important thing to us becomes engaging. or the most important thing is that it's adaptable. But I really believe that the framework of philosophy needs to be the most important thing. So those are just some thoughts from me, but hopefully you'll see that through this Tru Fire webinar that I really believe that Tru Fire does have a good, solid foundation with its philosophy. And so let's move on. So I'm going to take you through a couple of elements with Tru Fire, some of the main elements that I really think are important that we've really prioritized are that the Tru Fire is different from other curriculums because it's got a spirit-empowered focus. You don't see that a whole lot in curriculums, but I would say that's one of the core elements of our philosophy, that we want kids to be changed and transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit. We see that accomplished a lot through interactive response stations. There's a real emphasis on prayer, a real emphasis on kids relating to the ministry of the Holy Spirit. And then we've got family ministry philosophy that is prevalent across a lot of different curriculums, but that's real strong in Tru Fire. And we like to believe that our lessons are customizable and easily adaptable. So let's just push through. There's a bunch of different curriculums or for different ages. We've got blessings for 3-year-olds. We've got pre-K and kindergarten for Wonder. Story is elementary, and finally identity is for middle schoolers. Some people move these around and they use them for different ages, but that's typically what they were written for. So blessings functions in a 1-year scope and sequence. Each year it repeats. We really believe a lot in repetition. You'll see with blessings that lessons are the same lesson for 2 weeks. Now that doesn't mean that they everything about that lesson is the same. The way it's taught is different. A lot of the elements of the lesson are different, but it's just got the same topic. We're covering the same topic each week for 2 weeks. So you see that 4 quarters, different main points we're trying to cover. Wonder is more similar to Story. It's a 3-year scope and sequence. They are chronologically going through the Bible each year, but understand that they cover different ponder points and they're covering different stories from the Bible because different kids at different ages need to learn different things. And then we've got Story, which again is a 3-year scope and sequence, looks very similar to Wonder. And we'll cover a bit more of this in a moment. For Story, we have a timeline that we go through each week. We like to refer to this so that kids know where we are in the big God story. So let's move on. We're going to look at the scope and sequence of Tru Fire. And like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to write them in there. But this is the scope and sequence. Basically, what we see there's a couple of things I want to note from the scope and sequence. The first thing is we do lessons once every 4 lessons. You'll see this asterisk here on this left-hand side. This asterisk is seen a few times. It's 3 times per quarter. What that means is we provide a full storytelling video that's between 8 and 12 minutes long, usually. That video can replace your teaching for the Sunday. It's a nice thing to have in place. We're not super media heavy. We instead really believe that kids need live people. Kids need real live people to speak to them. Sorry, somebody just said that we do not have. Let me see. Are you seeing this? No. Are we seeing this screen? No. I don't know. It's saying it's paused. I don't know if you can see this, but scope and sequence wise, we run 13 weeks. There's 4 quarters in a year. Every 6th and 13th week, we have a Remember and Celebrate weekend. These are different weekends. It's weeks where we stop, weeks where we basically encourage kids to remember the things that we've learned in the past 6 weeks and celebrate those things. And so that's a really big part of Tru Fire. And so you can see these weeks are quite prominent. You see these every quarter. It's really cool to see kids remember the things that God's done in their life. You'll also see on the right side the remember verses. Per quarter, there's 3 remember verses. That's really important. Another thing we can see here is that our ponder points are God-centered statements. So God is Redeemer. God is worthy of worship. God is the Lord. The big thing with this is that our lessons are focused lessons are focused on God, our primary element. We're not a character-based curriculum. Instead, we really want our kids to know who God is, and we want them to form a relationship with Him. And so that's a really big part of this. You'll see also we move pretty quickly through the Bible, even though we cover the Bible chronologically and we go through the whole Bible each year. So in September we're starting in Genesis, and through till August the next year we end in Revelation. What you find is that each year of the scope and sequence, we're covering different stories, different attributes of different stories, and kids are learning different things about some of the same stories. And so really getting a good picture of different years of the scope and sequence is worth doing, and you can do that through the website. A couple of things to note about this is with the scope and sequence, we do, even though we're chronological, we do make space in December where we're talking about Christmas and the story of Jesus' birth. And then in Easter, we do talk about Jesus' death and resurrection. And so we do break from the chronological nature of the curriculum to make sure that we're covering those significant times of the year. We'll get started and show you kind of we'll show you kind of what a typical lesson may look like. Sometimes this gets updated a little bit, but this is kind of how it looks. We've got a ponder point main here in the front. This is the real one lesson we want our kids to understand. We've got the Bible passage we're covering, the scriptures will be in, and we've got a remember verse. And then we've got this schedule. And this is kind of how every Tru Fire Story lesson will look. So we've got explore, discover, respond, and bless. And those are the key things that we're going to jump into in a moment. Before we do, at the start of every lesson, we have this element called leader prep. We really believe passionately that our kids, our leaders cannot minister to kids unless the lesson is ministered to themselves. You know, it's kind of like a pastor preaching something that they haven't really gone through themselves. You know, if we were to get up in front of our congregations, we'd kind of say, hey, you know, we want to be preaching something that God's already done in our life. We wouldn't want to be hypocrites. And in some ways, that's the case for this. So this is, we have inspire, equip, and support. So inspire is really just story from a minister around the country. Equip is kind of that biblical passage. It's kind of given a bit more of a context to it. And then support is kind of a prayer, and it's kind of just a reflection to kind of challenge your leaders. I love this part because our leaders often don't make it into service when they serve. And so this is a real good way. We can send this to them in the week. It's a great way for them to prepare. Sometimes we'll give it them on Sunday morning when they arrive. And so I really encourage you to make use of that. So the 4 elements, we've got explore, discover, respond, and bless. We'll kick off with explore. And explore, essentially, this is like an opening activity that really piques the interests of our kids. And so we're trying to get them curious about the lesson. We're trying to get them started. And basically, this explore activity is generally designed for a small group at the start. A lot of churches, when kids arrive, will go straight into small group. There's 2 options to choose from. Generally, one's related more to younger kids, one's more to older kids. But typically, most kids can do either or. And one of the things that I would say about this is a lot of churches don't start in small group. I will tell you this, if I trusted my small group leaders to arrive early enough, then I would start in small group. But the way it works often for my churches, we start with free play. Our kids love that. It's a great time for kids to build relationships. And so we like to make this basically a table or a station in our area where we do free play. And I encourage a lot of kids to go over to it. When new kids come, it's the place I take them to because there'll often be a leader there doing the activity with kids and explaining it to them. Some churches even do this in the lobby. So when parents are dropping off at check-in, the parents will actually do this activity with their kids. And I really think that's a really powerful way to include parents in the learning process and kind of just get them started understanding what the lesson is about for the day. But we just want to pique kids' interest. And so usually this is a fairly simple opening activity that doesn't require a whole lot of supplies. And if they are, then they're usually supplies around the building. Discover is really where we go to large group. And so Discover is kind of really where we do our main teaching. So there's a couple of elements to Discover. The first thing is that we see traditions and a remember verse. So traditions, as you can see on this left side with this picture, is really just it's just a way to do a reward system. A lot of churches do Bible books, or they do some kind of system where essentially it's individual rewards. And Michelle Anthony, who created the curriculum, really believed that we create competition in our ministries among kids, when really we should be creating this really environment where kids are championing one another. And so traditions works with if you've got one kid who brings his Bible, another kid is not going to be unhappy about that, because you get these things called mementos. So for every good thing a kid might do, they get what we call a memento. In this situation on the left, it's a rock. And for every rock they get to place it in their container. These 3 containers on the left represent 3 different church services. And basically, when that container gets full, that church service would get a big party or a big reward together. So I really like it because it encourages each other to celebrate each other's wins. If one friend brings a friend, then it's not something that counts against another. So that's traditions. Remember verse is basically our memory verse that we learn each week. There's not necessarily actions to learn, but there are graphics and a video that can be played for that. And so that's worth checking out. And again, those change with the scope and sequence. Another element of Discover is Connect. And I really love Connect because there's 2 elements to it. There's the Connect question, which we see here. And that Connect question is usually just a fun, interactive question. I find every week that when I say the Connect question, our kids throw up their hands and they're excited to answer. It's really just something to get them talking. My kids love to talk. And so this requires kind of short answers. It's really simple. And, if you've got a large group, sometimes we'll say, hey, turn to your partner and you've got 30 seconds to share this. And they'll do kind of a pair share. Another element of this is kind of an activity. And here you see there's 2 options for an activity. That's not always the case, but these activities usually get kids up, they get them moving, they get them doing something. They're a lot more engaging. And there's a reason for these activities being placed here, is because these are right before the Big God story. So it kind of gives this opportunity to get kids off their feet or onto their feet and kind of moving around right before we go into our main bulk of teaching. So here we've kind of got our Big God story, and this is kind of the main element of a Tru Fire lesson. We call it the Big God story because we passionately believe that that God is the hero of the story of the Bible, and we believe that more than that, that the Bible, that the Big God story isn't just limited to the Bible. We believe that we're a part of God's big story right now. That you and me are no different in many ways from King David or from other people we see in the Bible. It's really a big part of the curriculum, because a lot of curriculums place focus on the individual people. I remember as a child, I was often told of the heroes of the Bible, King David, and used to think as a child, how am I ever going to be like them? But what we do with our ponder points is we place the emphasis on God. And we're not trying to learn how we can be more like King David or how we can be more like Abraham. Instead, we're trying to say, hey, wow, look at who God is and look at what that means to me. And so that's really important. It makes a big difference, because we're saying basically, if God could use someone who was as stupid as King David at times, then he can use me also. And so that's really a big part of the lesson. That's how we teach. We're constantly trying to tell the story of the Bible, but introduce this ponder point. Basically, what can we learn about God from this story? And then consequently, what does that mean to me? So really, when we're looking for people in my ministry to teach the Big God story, I'm looking for people who are good storytellers. I'm not looking for someone who's going to stand up and give a 3-point sermon. I'm not looking for the best preacher. I'm looking for a really good storyteller. And basically, the way the Big God story works is you get a script. And we really encourage our people, hey, won't you just take time and read it once or twice? Uh, Read it through the first time. Once you got a gist of what it's saying, go through the second time with a highlighter or a marker and just mark the areas where you feel like you're going to have to read a scripture, maybe the areas where you're going to have to do something. You'll see that kind of difference between the bold lettering and the italics. And go through and just highlight the important things. And then by that second time, usually people have enough grasp. Usually they understand the story or knew the story already, and they're ready to share it and teach it. Certainly by the third time of reading it. So I really encourage you to kind of do that. We don't say to people, "Hey, we want you to read this script." We want this to be interactive. We want this to be engaging, and we want it to kind of capture kids' attention. And so you'll see here it gives you the supplies that you need for the lesson, how to set up, and then this relate section is essentially kind of what we should communicate and speak. You'll see each week up here, our storytelling technique changes each week. And so each week we're using different ways to communicate and different ways to engage kids. Next element to this, though, and this kind of partners side by side with the Big God story, is our worshipper's response. And this is what people love the most about Tru Fire. Okay, the worshipper's response is essentially a time when we're really responding to what God's doing in our heart. So I always say with the Big God story, this is us speaking to kids' heads, right? We can speak to their head. We can give them information. And what we want to do is want to capture their mind. But here, I really believe with worshipper's response, it's where God takes it from the head to the heart. Okay, it's where God kind of does the work that only he can do. And so we take this time where kids kind of respond, very similar to an altar time, but it's more something that kids do reflectively in their seat. Sometimes they'll move around and they'll do an activity. But the idea is that I always say I'm moving out of the way. I'm explaining what the worship response is. I'm explaining what this prayer station might look like, what kids are going to do. But then I'm going to allow a space. Some quiet music is going to come on, and kids are just going to respond in the way that they feel is fit. So when we come to the worshipper's response, we often want to do what we do for an altar call, and we want to say, hey, maybe you're in here and you're struggling with, your parents. Maybe you've got issues at school. Maybe you struggle with anger, but we're not trying to lead kids down a path. Instead, this is an opportunity for kids to come and say, okay, with this lesson that we're learning about God gives new life, what does that mean to me? What does new life mean to me? What do I need? How can God help me pursue a new life? And that means different things for different kids. If we were talking and sharing a story about Jonah, I believe that one child in that room could be called to missions, right? Because the story of Jonah, that's what we basically see. But we could also get from that story that one kid could be called to repentance because of their sin. And I think, so with this worshipper's response, we really want to leave it open. We want to allow kids to respond in the way that God's working on their heart. And so this takes time. It's difficult sometimes for our volunteers, but I've seen over a length of time, kids responding in ways that are just incredible. The way they open their heart up before God, the way they begin to kind of share with him the things that are going on, and essentially bringing those burdens and those requests to God. We're really teaching kids to be sensitive to the conviction and leading of the Holy Spirit. And that takes time, but it was really powerful in the long run. And I love this because essentially, we're really getting kids to have a relationship with God. It's not just about enjoying church, but it's about loving Jesus, right? So then we got this element of respond, and this kind of moves back into small group. So one thing I would say about worshipper's response before we move on is this kind of tests to see if the Big God story was engaging. You see, if kids were listening and they were engaged, then you'll see the results of it in the worshipper's response. You'll see the things that they wrote down. You'll see if they understood the ponder point. You'll see if they kind of grasped what it meant. And in the same way, this small group time, kind of goes one step further, because we have two elements here. We have the first element, which is kind of these questions. And so these questions we have questions for younger kids, and there's questions for older kids too. But these questions really, they begin with very knowledge-based questions. So they start off with, questions that you can easily answer if you listen to the story. That really tests if kids were listening to the story. And as you move through, you get a lot more application questions. And this is really to see if that worshipper's response time really was effective. Were kids able to relate the message and the story and the ponder point to their own life? And that's really what we want to see with that progression. So a big thing with our small groups is we tell our volunteers, hey, we don't want you to be strong teaching in this time. You're not really coming in to like tell kids this, and this. Instead, it's certainly for this part, you need to be people who are asking the questions and then allowing the awkward silence, right? Sometimes that's really difficult, but we want to allow kids to respond and to talk, because I really believe that if a kid's learning if they are talking, right? If they can explain something to you, then they've grasped that concept. And so these questions I find are really important. Let me just say as well, our kids in church are not opening their Bibles enough, and a lot of curriculums don't encourage them to do that. And I think this is so important here that we see, with these questions, I say to our leaders, hey, once you've asked the question, open up a Bible and get kids to find the scripture and get them to read the scripture just to verify the response and their answer. So I really appreciate that. And that next element to this is generally kind of a group activity. Often it could be making something together, but it's kind of like a respond activity. And again, often there's an option or two for that. The final aspect of the curriculum is really this thing called bless. And bless is really kind of a unique thing to Tru Fire. It really is different from prayer. This is more of what we call kind of a prayer of commission, a prayer of releases. So it says as our kids leave, basically we do this personally one-on-one with kids, and you'll see the blessing itself is right here. It says, may you always remember that God has a good plan for your life and that he is working to make his good plan happen. May you find peace in knowing he will lead you wherever you go. So this is something really that we speak over our kids. It's a way to kind of say, hey, we don't know what you're going back to. We don't know what your situation might be at home, but we're going to be someone who's going to speak life over you and speak life into you. And so it's different from a prayer. We're not praying to God, but we're praying over our kids or speaking over our kids. And so that's a big difference. And really, this has been something that people love, and it's been very powerful. I will say this, for our volunteers, often at the start, it's very awkward. It's very awkward because, it's that one-on-one thing. They're not used to it. It's not something that's a part of their situation. So when we start out, I'll often encourage churches and say, hey, start doing this large group. Make this a part of your culture. Once you've prayed, say, hey, now I'm going to bless you. And it's not about just reading a statement, but it's about making this a part of something that's meaningful. And this blessing kind of relates to the message. And our kids love it. Our kids are the ones who come back for it and want it. And it can be really powerful. So I encourage you to at least begin in that area and then eventually allow your volunteers to do it. So that's kind of the blessing. There are a couple more elements just to show you about the curriculum. We do have a family ministry support element. This is the blessing take-home paper. It's a lot more designed than the others. It's not editable. But for wonder and story, we do a much more basic editable document. A lot of churches make this double-sided and they put their announcements on the other side. They'll put a section for parents to sign and they can bring it back signed. So that's really helpful. This basically is slightly one of the differences for Tru Fire because we basically put a section in that says what we learned this week. Most curriculums focus on what the kid's learning this week. And basically what that says to parents is, hey, you guys are there to reinforce what we've already taught them. But what we really want to do with Tru Fire is we really want to turn it round. So we say to our parents, this is where we're heading next time. And when I hand this out to parents, I say, hey, parents, will you just take 5 minutes with your kids this week? Will you take one bedtime and will you share this story with your kids? Will you read this passage with them? Maybe at bedtime or whenever, because that means then you're telling your kids the story. And then when they come to church next week, we're just reinforcing what they're already learned. And I think that's really powerful because it really puts them in the position of primary spiritual influencer. A lot of curriculums talk about that, but are we really doing that? And that's really important if we're really going to see kids discipled. So there's a couple more things that families can do together with this. And every family is different. Some families do struggle to do this, but it's also the remember verse, and there's actually a blessing for kids to do. Something that really complements Tru Fire is Michelle Anthony's spiritual parenting curriculum set, which is a parenting curriculum, and that really talks about blessing, and there's a lot of value in kind of having your parents go through that to kind of prepare them and help them take on and understand this idea of blessings. Something else to know is that this Tru Fire Story take home is actually in Spanish as well, and it's really worthwhile. So the whole of the curriculum isn't currently in Spanish. Hopefully one day it will be, but right now our take-home papers are. We do find, or certainly I find personally, we have a French ministry at our church, and I find a lot of the children speak English very well, but it's actually the parents that probably struggle. So kind of the take-home paper in Spanish can often be very helpful for parents. So that's a couple of elements. If you want to see more information, you can go to Tru Fire Curriculum. You can download the scope and sequence there. You can download sample lessons. You can try it free for a whole month. If you've got questions, you can also schedule a time to talk one-on-one with a community leader. My information is on there. We have a Facebook group. If you're not a part of it, we encourage you to be a part of that. And then Tru Fire Tour is coming to a number of locations next year. Certainly we have Alabama and Houston, I think, already scheduled for next year, but there's going to be a lot more. So feel free to check those out. Here's my email address on the right if you are interested in talking to me or sending me an email. If you ask some questions, I am not sure I've been able to see them, but I will see. There's a sample video online. Someone asked about a sample video. If you want to go online, you'll be able to see those. If you do the try it free, you'll see a 4 weeks of curriculum, and in one of those lessons there will be a sample video of the storytelling video. So try it free is much better than sample videos because you get all of the extra resources with it. So you see typically what's involved in a lesson. Somebody asked about where do singing worship songs fit in the curriculum. There's a lot of elements to the curriculum that aren't included. So for instance, you don't see offering included. You don't see necessarily worship songs. There are suggestions for some worship songs in the curriculum of which ones to do. But generally, the way a lot of churches set up their service is they'll start with 3 or 4 worship songs, and then maybe in that discover section they would also add offering or a missions talk. So kind of a service and how you build a service. Maybe you wouldn't use the curriculum solely to build a service, but you would take some of those elements and build it. So maybe, for instance, you would start out with explore, and maybe that's the first thing you do as kids arrive. And then maybe as you transition to a large group, you start with worship, and then out of worship you pray, and then maybe you do your offering, and then maybe you do traditions and you do the connect question activity, and then maybe after that you do a missions talk. And so there's some elements that aren't necessarily included with the curriculum that people kind of add. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Okay, is there a way to watch this if teachers are working during the day? Yes, actually, we have this webinar already online. So we could actually send you a webinar that's been pre-recorded, and we can make sure that's available. That's on Vimeo, so we can make sure you get that. If you have any other questions, feel free to type them. I'm going to just see what else there is to cover. Again, the Facebook page is well worthwhile. You see how people really contextualize this to their situation, how they use it each week. We also have a Pinterest page that I would really encourage you to check out. There's a bunch of responses that kids have put up and things that kids have written from their response times that are really powerful, and you kind of see the curriculum in action a bit more. And here's just the last thing we'll cover before we finish is the prices for Blessings. This kind of works on a quarterly basis. Blessings is $49.99. That's for the 3-year-olds, 1 year scope and sequence. Wonder is $124.99 a quarter, so $500 throughout. And then same for Story is the same price. If you've got more than 50 kids in your ministry, then the price is $154.99 for both Wonder and Story on a quarterly basis. And then unit identity works in a different way. It's done by different units, and so it's $49.99 per unit. And again, if you want to access curriculum, you can get all of that through trufirecurriculum.com. So if you have any questions, you can feel free. Oh, let me see if there are any more. Let me see. There's a couple. Okay, how are the quarters broken down? What do you mean by that? If you look at the scope and sequence, you'll see quarters are broken down. You basically have a fall quarter that starts in September and ends in end of November. Then you have a winter quarter that starts in December and ends in end of February. So that means the spring quarter starts in March and ends in end of May, and then June begins the summer quarter. So that's kind of how it works. Right now, we operate with something called we call it a platform, I guess, but an online platform where what happens is if you sign up, you pay, and you would currently have access to fall and winter, and that helps you plan ahead. And then in 3 months' time, you would get charged again, and new curriculum would be made available quarterly. Some more questions. Okay. Okay, is it the best time to start the curriculum in September? Can you start anytime? I really suggest to people you should start at any point. There's a great lesson online. That lesson is called a Tru Fire Story overview lesson. That's really a big overview of the whole big God story. And that lesson was designed so that then you could do that lesson and then jump in at any point in the curriculum. That lesson can be downloaded for free in the resources section of the trufirecurriculum.com. So I always say jump in whenever. I mean, it really works for you, whatever time works for you. You want to obviously give yourself time to transition. But yeah, I don't recommend people starting to September. I feel like it's not really worthwhile. We just encourage people to just jump in. Kids are pretty adaptable with that, and it moves pretty quick. So yes. And then so someone just said the same thing. Can you start anytime? Yeah, we encourage people to start anytime. I know a bunch of people like to start in January. Some people do like to start in September because it's the start of the school year, but anytime really works. And again, that scope and sequence is editable. So download that document and just play around with it. Put in some dates and see when could work for you, and see what works. And then last thing, do you incorporate BGMC into this curriculum? This is a good question. So a lot of Assemblies of God churches have what we call a Boys and Girls Missionary Challenge, and it's basically it's a Sunday, one Sunday of the month, first Sunday often, that is missions focused. One of the things we really encourage people to do, there's a couple of ways you can do it. A lot of people like to make their Remember and Celebrate weeks on the 6th week and the 13th week. They like to make those BGMC Sundays. One of the good things about that is that you basically, when you're remembering, celebrating what God's doing in your life, you're also remembering and celebrating what he's doing around the world. And I love that. I think that really works together. It kind of gives kids a picture of, hey, what's he doing in me, but what's he also doing in others? And that's kind of cool. Another way that people do it, and this is probably more popular, is that people break BGMC lessons up. And what that means is they'll take maybe the True Mission story, maybe they'll take the video, maybe they'll take some other elements. And what they'll do is they'll separate those throughout the month. And so that means every week is a missions emphasis. I know in my ministry, it's hard to do a BGMC Sunday because kids often forget their offering, or and in my ministry, every offering we take up each week goes towards missions. And so I really try and emphasize the weekly BGMC. That way missions is consistently in front of our kids. And then maybe we'll emphasize stronger on a Remember and Celebrate week. And that can be really powerful for us. That seems like that is the last question, and I'm pretty sure that is also the last slide that I have. So thank you for being a part of our webinar today. I hope it was helpful to you. If you do have any other questions, feel free to contact me. Yeah, contact me here at my email address, and I would love to be in touch with you. So thank you very much for being a part. Hope you have a wonderful day.